I will cook you.
Tekken series producer Harada says that half of the Tekken's overall sales come from Europe. About 30% comes from America. That means 19% of the sales comes from the rest of the world. You talk about Africa, South America, China, Japan. We often hear Harada in the past, and I think he says so in the news article I want to talk about in a second, but he says that Japan isn't really that big on fighting games anymore, especially Tekken. We saw the Evo numbers where Street Fighter 6 had 4,000 people show up and then Tekken 8 had like 1,000. That's something that he wants to fix, but how does he go about doing that? I don't know. Now, shifting topics and talking about this news article that also comes from this interview podcast that Harada did, there's another thing that he discussed in this that was super fascinating, and also it points to why Tekken 8 was developed the way that it is. The headline says, Tekken Boss, which is Harada, says younger players prefer team games so they can shift responsibility if they lose. Just that headline alone, it kind of makes sense why they were talking about trying to add a 3 versus 3 in Tekken 8. Harada claims younger players are more interested in team-based games than one-on-one fighting games because it gives them less responsibility if they lose. At one point, Yoshido asked Harada for his opinion on how one-on-one fighting games can evolve in the future. Now, before we talk about that, I think it is kind of some truth to that because, like, if you're playing like a battle royale or something like that, your whole team gets wiped. You can always turn and say, you guys didn't cover me. You guys didn't do this. You guys should have been here instead of looting or this and that. There's so many different excuses you can make when it's a team game versus one-on-one. There's no excuses, nothing at all, which is another reason why I think Tekken has a big disconnection problem. Not only is the game like not doing anything about it, but it also is this thing with the player's mentality where they don't want to take a loss. They can't take a loss. Like, I was going up against someone who was very new to the game in a live stream like a month ago, and I was absolutely destroying that person. I almost triple perfect them. And instead of getting triple perfect, that person plugged and was like, they typed in the chat, what am I supposed to do? I'm trash at the game. And in their brain, it was like, plug. Instead of losing, plug. And that's why you have these screenshots going around now where players have like 12% disconnection, 74%. One person even had a 98% disconnection rate. That's because players just cannot accept the loss. Harada says, in Japan and probably most of the world, my generation is a big one. It makes up a good chunk of the population that made our society as a competitive one. If you apply to a school or a job, there's always a lot of competition because of this. People in my generation prefer definitive outcomes, a clear winner and loser. This applies to folks in their 50s. But most young people nowadays are the opposite. They are rarely eager to engage in one-on-one showdowns. Plus, because fighting games pit you by yourself against a single opponent, you have to accept all responsibility if you lose. You can't blame anyone else. In team-based shooters, when players win, they can say they won because of their own contributions. But when they lose, it's because they got matched with a lousy team. For those of you who play games like Call of Duty and whatnot, you'll often hear the term, I carried the team. But then on the flip side, if you lose, you guys all suck and I couldn't even carry you guys. That's how bad you guys are. That mentality definitely does exist, but I do think in terms of video games, fighting games had a role in allowing that to form. While games like Call of Duty was working super hard to connect everyone online, you talk about Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3, Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2, Call of Duty and FPS games were working really hard to build a online community and basically like train as a generation to be used to playing in teams. Before Call of Duty and the online era, fighting games were the ones that was on top. But see, the reason why I would say that things switched is because fighting games didn't adapt. They're still struggling to adapt to this day. But back then, when Call of Duty was building up that online player base, what was Tekken doing? Tekken was releasing their games on arcade for like a year and a half before it reaches console. And then even when it does reach in console, the online isn't as strong, it isn't as fleshed out as it should have been. Tekken Tag Tournament 2 came out when some of the most impactful Call of Duties was released, and that game was lacking in so much stuff. Yes, it had a bunch of characters, but it didn't really have modes and activities and things to build a online community like that. I really do relate to this news article a lot because when I play because I play many games. When I play another game, it really do feel like a social interaction. It really do feel like a community type of thing. But then when you go play Tekken and you're just sitting there waiting for a match to load, you're just hitting the computer and then you fight your opponent and then you go back to hitting the computer and waiting for a next match. It really do feel like a isolated type of gaming. You don't really have that interaction with a team. It's definitely a different experience, but I think they really dropped the ball when players started to switch from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 3, Xbox to Xbox 360. They failed to be there when everyone was building their online habits. So now when someone do experience a fighting game, it's kind of a unnatural feeling. You got to either change your mentality, you got to accommodate to the fighting games, or you're going to disassociate with it. It's going to be too unnatural to you. So I like what Harada is saying. I do appreciate that he understands this problem exists, but I think this problem is really deeply rooted in how people grew up playing video games. It's kind of getting to the point now where Tekken 8, Street Fighter, and Mortal Kombat 1 is some of the first fighting games that people are ever playing. And I think the fighting games can only be blamed for themselves for that because they were on top in the arcade era, in the PlayStation 2 era. But then they really failed to make that transition in the 360 days, build a strong online community. They just didn't. Harada then goes on to say that he's been thinking about how to incorporate this cultural shift into the fighting game genre to help make it appeal to the younger generation of players. I'm not saying we should suddenly turn the fighting game into a puzzle game, which they kind of do. Not necessarily a puzzle, but more so of a 50-50. Tekken 8 is full of mix-ups. But he says, or a real-time strategy game. I still think there's a demand for fighting games like this sort of hand-to-hand fighting. But maybe we could include some other ways of competing outside of the main game. For example, maybe we don't always have to fight each other one-on-one. They could opt for a team battle such as 3-on-3. Now I mentioned this at the start of the video because Harada mentioned this back in the Tekken talk, and just to see how frequently he's talking about it, it really seems like this is something they're going to implement. He then goes on to say, I think we may incorporate this into the online mode's official rankings. Maybe team matches could have a position within a team, something like the order of teammates in judo matches. Right now, Tekken 8's online mode, each player fights alone, battle after battle, just trying to climb ranks. Maybe with more varied modes based on things like teams or regions, it could add more metagaming as well. Now, this is something that I think is an issue too with Tekken. Everyone is plugging. It's a massive problem. I showed you guys the disconnection rates. I'll show you again. I do think in Tekken, there's a lot of people playing in ranked that really should not be in ranked. They need more modes to get all of those people like attention elsewhere. Because if you think about it, right, Call of Duty, Overwatch, Valorant, like all of those games have a ranked mode. But if you play those games, comment down below if you play those ranked modes or if you just play the casual modes within those games. I don't know why, but for fighting games, players feel like it's mandatory to go into ranked and that's it. And that puts so much strain on the individual to feel like they need to win and perform, which is why the developers gave players a free ride all the way up to warrior rank. Like, this really goes so deep, and in this video I'm just trying to explain like some of it because it really like overlaps over each other, from easy mechanics, easy characters, easy progression in ranked. Why are players in ranked in the first place when they don't even know how to play the game? They should be somewhere else learning how to play the game and having fun. It just goes on and on and on. And the fact that Harada is having this kind of conversation, it just shows that he understands that this is a major problem and they need more varied modes in the game to not only add fun, but just to add metagaming and just to make it a better experience overall, because I think there's many things that factor into the Tekken experience, and this is one of the big ones.